Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news video up here to discuss. As we're talking about a couple of waiver updates, a couple of injury updates, we've got a small trade to discuss, and we've got a couple of trade rumors involving the Senators, Leafs, Flames, Sabres, and Red Wings. And we'll go through all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Talking Channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. I've never been able to do it without you guys, so don't forget to subscribe so we can hit 250 subscribers. Now, I would usually start off by discussing a recent signing that's happened over the past couple of days. There was only one that did happen over the past couple of days, and we did a separate video discussing this. I'll link up in the YouTube cards. But William Nylander signed an 8-year deal with an AAV of $11.5 million to remain with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that was a massive deal. Did own dedicated video to that, so I'm not going to really discuss it that much here, but really good sign there for the Leafs. It's really going to hurt their cap hit, which we're going to talk about in a little bit of time here, but definitely it was a really good sign there for the Leafs to finally get Nylander locked up, and he's not going to free agency, so that's a really good sign. But that was the only sign over the past couple of days. So go over to the waiver updates over here now from the past couple of days. We talked about this on Saturday, how Zach Sanford was placed on waivers by Arizona Coyotes. I thought he was probably going to wind up being cleared. He wound up being claimed. The Chicago Blackhawks, who have a ton of injuries on the forward group right now, wound up claiming him, and he's going to be joining the Chicago Blackhawks. So it's a really good waiver claim there from the Blackhawks. I think Sanford will be a decent bottom 6-4. Like I said, he's more of a fringe NHL forward, so I thought if there was a team out there who could really use some forward help, then maybe there was a chance that Sanford would be claimed, and he does wind up getting claimed. So like I said, he's probably be a good bottom 6-4 for the Blackhawks right now. The Blackhawks don't have too much depth on their team, so I wouldn't be too surprised if that team really used him in like a third-line role, even if I'm correct. So it will be interesting to see, but the Coyotes didn't really need Sanford anymore. They called Dylan Gunther. He actually scored a goal on Sunday, so the Coyotes really didn't need Sanford anymore, so they placed on waivers. He's just, for the Coyotes, at least at this point in time, a decent depth forward, but with the Blackhawks having a ton of injuries and having a really beat-up forward group, definitely I could see why they wind up claiming Sanford, and he's a decent forward I think they'll definitely be able to utilize. So that's really interesting stuff there for the Blackhawks, who are able to get a huge, really good bottom 6-4 for the next little while. Like I said, he's more of a French NHL player, and for most teams he'd probably be even possibly an AHL player, but with the Blackhawks having a ton of injuries, I can see why they claimed him. So Sanford wound up being claimed. Not overly surprised there with the Blackhawks' slew of injuries. And then we also had one more waiver placement yesterday, and that was that the Calgary Flames placed Kevin Rooney on waivers. Rooney, if I'm correct, was dealing with an injury earlier in the year, and he needs waivers to go down, so I wouldn't be overly shocked if, given the fact he was in injury reserve and also makes over $1 million, he winds up clearing. I would not be overly shocked. He's a decent fourth-line center when healthy, but he's also been injured at some points this year, and he hasn't really been able to stay healthy, so I wouldn't be overly shocked if he wound up clearing. At this point in time, I don't know the outcome, given the fact that we don't know the waiver outcome at this point in time, but still, given the fact Rooney is more of a fourth-line center who maybe a tiny bit overpaid at $1.3 million and has been injured this past months, I would probably expect him to clear. I wouldn't be overly shocked if Rooney did clear for the Flames and he wound up clearing waivers, so I don't think that would be too much of a surprise. So that's the only two waiver updates we have over the past couple of days. Sanford was claimed off waivers by the Chicago Blackhawks. Like I said, I thought the only chance Sanford would have of being claimed would be if there was a team who would really desperately need a forward upgrade, and there was a team who would really desperately need a forward upgrade in Chicago. So Sanford heads to Chicago and will be a decent bottom 6 forward there. For Calgary Flames, they placed Kevin Rooney on waivers. He's now healthy, so the Flames probably wanted to move him to the minors, and he's making over $1 million, almost injured for quite a bit of time this year, so I would probably expect him to wind up clearing waivers, but we'll have to wait and see if he does want to clear or not. Maybe there's a team who takes the chance out there who needs like a fourth line center, but still I think it would probably be most likely that Rooney winds up clearing. So those are two waiver updates in the past couple of days. Going over to an injury update from the past couple of days, James Van Riemsdyk has an undisclosed injury out day for Boston Bruins. Nick Foligno has a finger injury. Connor Bedard has a jaw injury. They haven't been updated yet, but it sounds like Foligno's going to miss a little bit of time. Bedard could potentially miss the All-Star game, so that's really bad blows there for the Blackhawks to lose two key players on their forward group. Phoenix Copley's knee injury has been updated. He's going to be out for the season, so the Kings lose their backup for the entirety of the season. That's a really bad blow. I wonder if they try to look elsewhere and try and get their backup. Max Jones has an upper body injury. He's out for an unknown period of time. Evan Rodriguez and Alex Barkov in Florida, as well as Carson Carson Soucy in Vancouver have all been cleared to play. Sam Bennett has an upper body injury and is out for an unknown period of time for Florida. Will Carey has an upper body injury and is out for an unknown period of time for Vegas. Zach Whitecloud has an upper body injury and is out day-to-day for the Vegas Golden Knights, while Jaden Schwartz returned to game action for Seattle Kraken. So that's really good stuff to see. And then William Karlsson's lower body injury was updated to week. So that's a horrible blow for the Vegas Golden Knights. Jonas Siegenthaler has a broken foot. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. My guess will probably be in the next month or two. It'll probably be a little bit of time. So interesting stuff there for Siegenthaler. And then we saw Strome be cleared to play by the Anaheim Ducks, as well as Troy Terry. Andrew Kopp was cleared to play by the Detroit. Marcus Foligno was cleared to play by the Minnesota Wild. Jacob Pelletier was cleared to play by the Calgary Flames. Nikita Zadorov was cleared to play by the Vancouver Canucks. So really good stuff there. But then we also saw Boston have Brandon Colo have a upper body injury and he's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Josh Manson has an undisclosed injury out for an unknown period of time for the Colorado Avalanche. And Tanner Jeannot's lower body injury is going to be out week to week for Tampa Bay Lightning, who lose yet another piece on their forward group. So really bad blows there for some of these teams. Really good to see guys like Marcus Foligno get back, Ryan Strome, Troy Terry, Jaden Schwartz, Carson Soucy. Lots of good stuff there on the injury front. But we did have a couple of really bad injury updates, such as William Karlsson being out week to week, Tanner Jeannot being out week to week, and Phoenix Copley's season being over for the LA Kings. So really bad injury updates there. But those are your injury updates from the past couple of days. Now going over to a small trade that happened between the Chicago Blackhawks and the Pittsburgh Penguins. This was a decent trade, and this is as follows. With the Blackhawks now having a lot of injuries on their forward group, we talked about how they claimed Sanford. They also made a small trade to improve their forward group even more for the short term, as they traded the Pittsburgh Penguins their 2026 7th round pick, which is conditional. I'm not exactly sure the conditions on it, in exchange for forward Rem Pitlick. So this was a decent trade in my opinion for the both sides. For Penguins, they have a decent forward group. Their bottom six isn't overly great, but Pitlick wasn't getting any NHL actions. He's also a pending UFA, so they're probably not going to keep him long term. He was acquired in the Erik Karlsson deal from Montreal, so I don't think it's overly surprising he winds up being dealt. They get a 7th round pick in return, something that they can use for the future. Really good stuff there for Pittsburgh to grab a draft pick for someone who they weren't even playing. For Chicago Blackhawks, this is just sort of a short-term stopgap. So far this year, in 32 games over in the AHL for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Rem Pitlick has 8 goals and 24 points, so he's doing pretty good so far this year. Last year, he had 6 goals and 15 points in 46 games with Montreal at the NHL level, and 5 goals and 22 points in 18 games at the AHL level. So he's a decent bottom six forward. He's not someone who's going to be putting up a whole bunch of points, but he's someone who can be a serviceable bottom six forward. On a regular NHL team, I think he just lost Waiver in Pittsburgh, but on most teams, he could definitely be a solid 4th line spare forward, and Chicago, he'll probably be a 3rd line forward with all of their injuries as of right now. So it will be interesting to see, but I don't think this is too much of a surprise. The Blackhawks have a ton of injuries in the forward group right now, and they need some short-term help, so they claim Sanford off of waivers and the waiver update part of the video, and they make a small trade here for Rem Pitlick. So I think Pitlick will definitely have a chance to be an NHL forward with the Blackhawks, at least for the time being, possibly even further on, maybe even when they get a little bit healthier. I think Pitlick stands a good chance to still be, at the very least, a spare forward. So it'll be interesting to see, but that's a really good trade there for the Blackhawks. They get a decent bottom six forward who's in the final year of his deal, who can help in the short term. The Penguins get a decent draft pick for a player who was not even playing for him. So that's a decent small trade. I think at this point in time, it was probably the Blackhawks who win, given the fact they get a player who can help them in the short term. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on who you think winds up being the winner of this deal. And lastly, going over to a couple of quick trade rumors. First, just a couple of quick hits here for the Detroit Red Wings and Buffalo Sabres. I've seen a couple of reports over the past little while saying that a couple more players that could be dealt by Detroit and Buffalo, if they are going to be sellers at the deadline, would be Sprong in Detroit and Jersey and Greenway in Buffalo. Now, for Detroit, we know that there's a lot of talk over the past little while that with them sort of falling out of the playoff mix at this point in time, they're still tied for a playoff spot, but they're not where they were at the early part of the year, where they looked like they would be a guaranteed top 3 team. Definitely, it seems like they are falling a little bit. There's a lot of talk about Patrick Kane possibly being a deadline move, but a name that's sort of gone under the radar a little bit that could also be a possible trade option is Daniel Sprong. He signed a 1-year, $2 million deal in the offseason and is having a fantastic year in the Red Wings bottom six. He's a very good, versatile player who can definitely play not over abundance of minutes tonight, but put up a ton of points. Last year, put up 20 goals and 40 points with the Seattle Kraken. So far this year, he's been a really good and productive forward for the Detroit Red Wings. So he's been a really good fit there in Detroit. Now, if they were to try and move some pieces off at the deadline, he would probably be one of the more likely ones to go, given the fact he's a pending UFA. So I think there would be a very likely chance that Sprong could definitely go if they wound up being sellers. We talked about Kane a lot, and I definitely think Kane would get a lot of interest, especially given the way he's played since he's gone back. But Sprong's also been a really good productive forward in the bottom six with the Red Wings this year, and is one of the bigger reasons why Red Wings are still in the playoff hunt. So if the Red Wings do find themselves on the outside looking in, and they are sellers at the deadline again this year, I could see Sprong be a guy who a lot of contenders look for. If the Red Wings were willing to retain $1 million on his cap hit, Sprong at $1 million to be a solid fourth or third line forward on a playoff team would be a fantastic addition. So we'll be interested to see, but I could definitely see Sprong be a really good addition there for a couple of teams at the trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see, but his name seems to be out there, and if the Red Wings are sellers, I could definitely see him move his name. Jordan Greenway, same sort of thing with Buffalo. We talked about how Victor Olofsson, with him being in the final year of his deal, is a really likely trade candidate for the Buffalo Sabres. Another one could be Jordan Greenway. This team has a lot of young talent, not only on the team, but coming up as well, so they're going to need to make room for those guys. Jordan Greenway, they acquired last year, the trade deadline, to try and help them improve their team. They removed, I think it was a second and fifth round pick for him, so it was a really decent trade for the Buffalo Sabres, but they were hoping to get a solid power forward, middle six guy who can definitely put up points. So far in his tenure with Buffalo, Green has mostly been like a third line forward and has not gone over abundance of points. He's been a really good player for the Sabres and really rounded out that top nine, but he's not getting a ton of points, so he could wind up being another guy who winds up being on the trade block. Olofsson's a really good player, but he's in the final year of his deal, which makes him a little bit more likely as a trade candidate than Greenway. Greenway has this year plus next year a $3 million cap hit, so I would also think that would be a little bit less likely for the Sabres to retain a little bit of money. But given the fact that a team could have him for not only this playoff run but next year as well, as a solid bottom six forward who could definitely help scoring wise. I've even seen some reports saying maybe even the Canucks could have some interest in this guy. Not exactly sure if that's true or not, but I could definitely see the Canucks go after a solid like a third line forward who could definitely help round out that team. So it will be interesting to see, but I could definitely see Sabres possibly move Greenway. Like I said, he's decent middle six forward. Maybe he's not someone who fits in long term to the Buffalo Sabres solution. So it will be interesting to see, but I definitely do think that there's a very likely chance that the Sabres wind up moving Greenway. So it's another situation we have to watch out for, but I think Sprong in Detroit, given the fact he's a pending UFA, could definitely be moved if the Red Wings were to be sellers. And Greenway, with the depth on that forward group for the Buffalo Sabres, and given the fact he hasn't really overly worked out too well in Buffalo, I could also see him be a possible trade option for the Buffalo Sabres. So it'll be interesting to see, but those are sort of trade options there we could see from the Buffalo Sabres and the Detroit Red Wings. It sounds like those two guys could be guys who get mentioned around the trade rumor mill over the next couple of months. So we'll have to wait and see, but look out for Sprong and Greenway to possibly be dealt by the Red Wings and Sabres if they are sellers. Next, going over to the Ottawa Senators. On Saturday Night Headlines with Elliot Friedman, and also on the 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman was mentioning the Ottawa Senators and saying they're not at the point yet where they're willing to trade a core piece. So it sounds like at this point in time, even though there was some mention about this a little while ago, it sounds like they're not at this point ready to sort of move a core player. They're not there yet. Not saying they won't get there, and they possibly could, but at this point in time, they really want to try and keep their young core together, but they are looking for a couple of professional players. It sounds like they're trying to look for more players sort of like Giroux, who know how to play the game well and are good veteran leaders who can definitely help this team sort of adapt a winning mentality, because under DJ Smith, they've sort of become comfortable, according to Elliot Friedman, and it's sort of like they're starting to develop a losing culture in that system, and it's not really an overly good recipe for success. So it definitely seems like the Senators, while they could possibly eventually move a core piece if things go horribly wrong, at this point in time, they're not looking to move a core piece, and they are looking to try and add a pro. So I'm not exactly sure who they would try and target. There have been no mentions about who they could possibly look to, but my guess would be someone like a Giroux, who could definitely be a solid middle six forward, who could definitely step in, help on that team, but is also sort of a veteran leader who can help that team. So I'm not exactly sure who they would try and target here. Definitely, if you think there's someone who they should try and target, let me know down in the comment section, but I haven't really seen any sort of linkage to any sort of players who could definitely try and help that team. And Elliot Friedman also thinks they could look for a possible long-term solution, maybe even a short-term solution. So it's not someone who's going to just help them possibly this year or just possibly next year. There could be someone who helps them both for not only the short-term but the long-term solution as well. So we'll be interested to see, but it sounds like the Senators are trying to shop for a pro-type player, someone like a Claude Giroux, who could definitely be a solid middle six forward and help them develop a winning mentality, because it seems that they're starting to develop a losing mentality in Ottawa, and that's not overly great news for them. And it looks like they'll probably try it before the deadline to add, and I'm not exactly sure if they would be looking to add on the forward group or looking to add on the defensive end, but they're looking to add a solid veteran type leader to that team who could definitely help possibly be a good point producer as well and sort of help work with that team Maybe not even just for this year, but for next year as well. So it'll be interesting to see. But the Ottawa Senators could definitely be a team who's looking to add. And Elliot Friedman did say that they're probably one of the busier teams that are being talked to about right now. So that'll be an interesting situation to watch out for. Going over to the Calgary Flames, there was a really interesting thing that I saw on Saturday Night Headlines as well, Search Sauce podcast. And that's Elliot Friedman saying that the Calgary Flames could be not dealing Noah Hanifin. Now, he says it's definitely not a guarantee, but he's talked to a couple of people who think that there's not a 100% guarantee that Hanifin gets traded, and they think that Hanifin is sort of talking with Calgary again. Now, personally, I think Hanifin gets traded. There's been so much talk over the past, not only just in season, but also in the offseason too, that Hanifin didn't want to stay in Calgary. He wanted to get moved. There sounded like there was going to be a mega extension. It sounded like it was going to be a 7-year, around $60 million deal to keep Hanifin in Calgary before they started to tailspin at the beginning of the year. And then Hanifin said that he wasn't going to resign. I still don't think Hanifin was going to resign. My guess would be that Calgary, given the fact Hanifin is one of their younger UFAs, probably wants to try and keep him around, given the fact he's a solid top pair defenseman. He's a little bit younger, so if they do go for a little bit of a retool in 2 to 3 years, when they start to try and be real good, legit Stanley Cup contenders, they could probably use Hanifin as like a solid piece. So I can see why Calgary would want to keep him, but they've already given out so many overpriced contracts to some of these guys over the past couple of years, like Huberdeau, Kadri, Uyghur's not overly overpriced, but still he's a pretty big overprice. It sounded like they were going to have to overpay to keep Hanifin as well, so I think that'll probably be the only way Hanifin remains there. I think he still wants to go to the US. I think he still could easily possibly want to go to Boston, so I think Hanifin still gets moved at some point. I still think the Flames are going to get a package they probably can't refuse. I think they can easily get like a first-round pick and a really good prospect for Hanifin, so it will be interesting to see, but it sounds like, according to Elliot Friedman, that Hanifin's contract talks haven't possibly picked up again with him and the Calgary Flames, and maybe it's not a 100% guarantee that he gets moved, but in my opinion, I do think Hanifin gets moved. He's a decent defenseman. He's a really good top 4 defenseman. He's a really good left shot defenseman, but I don't think it'll be smart for the Calgary Flames to re-sign him and overpay first. And secondly, I think they're going to get an offer they truly can't refuse. And I think the Flames are still a team who probably won't make the playoffs. Now, they're hanging around there right now, but they have only been able to get over 500 once this year. And right after getting to 500, they lost back-to-back games. So I still have no confidence in the Calgary Flames making the playoffs this year. I think they will be sellers at the deadline, and I think Hanifin still is one of the guys to go. But according to Elliot Friedman, does sound like it's not a 100% guarantee that Hanifin does not possibly re-sign with the Calgary Flames. It's still a possibility. And lastly here, going over to the Toronto Maple Leafs, could we see a potential Toronto Maple Leafs offseason moves? Now, we talked about this yesterday in our video dedicated to Nylander signing. The Leafs cap situation is extremely tight right now. If you look at the Leafs cap situation, like we said, next year is going to be extremely tight. So I just want to take a quick look here at the cap situation for the Leafs, looking at sort of what they're looking at here for next year. Nylander has going to start his 8-year, $11.5 million deal next year. Matthews is going to start his 4-year, $13.25 million AAV deal next year. You still have Tavares at $11 million. You still have Marner at $10.9 million. And then you also have Riley at $7.5 million. So those 5 players really take up around $54 million in cap space. That is a whole bunch of money taken up by just 5 players. So you have basically just over $30 million to fill out the rest of your roster. That's going to be extremely difficult to do. Now, if you look at their team, they have a couple of big contracts coming off the books. Tyler Bertuzzi, who has a $5.5 million cap hit, comes off as a UFA. Domi, who has a $3 million cap hit, comes off as a UFA. TJ Brody, who has a $5 million cap hit, comes off as a UFA. The 3 players who are currently on long-term injury reserve, and Murray, Muzzin, and Klimberg, all come off as UFAs. So those will be some interesting situations there for the Leafs, but it's going to be interesting to see how they fill out the roster. I mean, Jeannot is a pending UFA at this point in time too. Maybe he signs as a cheap 1-year deal. I could see Brody possibly re-sign with the Toronto Maple Leafs, maybe for a little bit lower end of a contracts, maybe like a 1 to 2 year deal at maybe like a $2.5 million. I could see Brody possibly sign like that. They still have a cheap contract in Jake McCabe, Connor Timmins. Timothy Logan's probably going to want an extension of a little bit of a more increased cap hits next year. Simone Benro could probably be signed for like a cheap cap hit. But they're probably going to need to try and restructure that blue line. I mean, Riley's a good player. If they bring up Brody, he's a solid top 4 defenseman. Logan can definitely still be a top 4 defenseman, but I think this team still needs probably 1 top 4 defenseman, probably 1 third pair defenseman. So I think this team could probably still need a couple more defensemen in the offseason. If you look at their forward group, if you lose Bertuzzi and Domi, that's going to be huge blows to that team. I mean, Domi's been really good on the third line. Bertuzzi's been pretty good on the second line. And there was even some talk early in the year that they would want to keep Bertuzzi on a long-term contract after signing him to a one-year deal. So it will be interesting to see, but I could definitely see him trying to re-sign Bertuzzi, but it's going to be extremely difficult. Basically, at this point in time for next year, they're projected to have $66 million tied up in 12 players at the NHL level. So at this point in time, they're currently projected to not have a ton of cap space. They're currently projected to have $21 million in cap space to fill out for at the very least 8 players. So they still need to rework that blue line, especially if Brody leaves or Jeannot retires. They could definitely be looking to try and restructure their blue line. The goaltending could be some one of their bright spots. Wall's been a really good starter 1A situation there for the Leafs. If they can sign Martin Jones or some other cheap 1B goaltender for like $1.5 million, your goaltending situation wouldn't be overly bad. You would be able to split starts between Wall and whoever you get as their backup, and you would only be paying them $2 million. So I could definitely see him do something like that. On the forward group, you have your top 4. You need to try and figure out the rest of your forward group. I mean, Niaz is still on an entry-level contract. Could they possibly look to add a couple of more young guys on their team? Could they look to possibly add a couple of cheaper forwards? Could they still try and sign Bertuzzi and Domi after signing Nylander to this sort of deal? It'll be interesting to see, but they're going to have a lot of decisions to work on. I know there'll be some talks about Marner and his next deal. Could he be dealt? I don't think Marner will be dealt by the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I could see them possibly try and sign him to a new deal. I think he's higher than Nylander, but I still don't think he's at Matthews level, given the fact that Matthews is a 60-goal scorer and that Matthews is a center, which usually get paid higher. But I could see Marner command somewhere around like $13 million. So I could see him get a little bit of an increase, but I don't think he's going to surpass Matthews. And on top of that, I also don't think that Tavares is going to sign for an extremely high price tag. When Tavares' contract is up, not this offseason, but the next offseason, I could definitely see him sign something like a Joe Pavelski contract, where he signs a 3-year, $6 to $7 million cap hit and sort of remains in Toronto on a cheaper contract. So it'll be interesting to see, but I definitely think that Tavares will probably wind up signing for cheaper, and that should allow him to do a lot more things in the next offseason. But this upcoming offseason is going to be fascinating for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It'll be interesting to see how they rework their team, because I think that blue line needs help. The goaltending still needs a little bit of situational help to see who's the sort of World's backup next year. And they also need to try and figure out how to restructure that top 9 now that Nylander is going to be signed. So it'll be interesting seeing it. It is a really tight cap situation, but I could see the Leafs try and probably make some moves in the offseason and try and restructure that team. So it'll be interesting to see. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. How do you think the Leafs try and rework their cap situation to improve that team? Do they move Marner? Do they consider that? Could they just try and wait out 1 year and then try and make a better team in the next offseason when Tavares' contract's up and he possibly signs for a lower price tag? Could that be a possibility for the Leafs? Could they look to try and rework that blue line? Definitely love to hear your thoughts on the Leafs. Do you see the Ottawa Senators trying to acquire a professional type player? Do you think they could possibly add a guy maybe on the second pair or the third line who could definitely be a solid point producer, but definitely also help that team in the locker room develop winning mentality? I could definitely see that happen. Do you think there's any chance that Hanifin signs with the Calgary Flames? I personally do not see it happening. I think he gets traded, so it'll be interesting to see, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. And if he does get traded, where do you think he goes? Do you see Sprong being dealt by Detroit or Greenway being dealt by Buffalo? Personally, I think Buffalo and Greenway could definitely be separating, given the fact that Greenway hasn't fit in overly well with Buffalo. But Detroit and Sprong, I could definitely see that also be a possible trade candidate, given the fact Sprong's a pending UFA. If the Red Wings are sellers at deadline, I could definitely see Sprong be one of the guys who ends up getting moved. So it will be interesting to see, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what you think about Sprong and Greenway, and what do you think about the small trade between the Penguins and the Blackhawks, the injury updates, and the waiver updates. Definitely love to hear your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're like, remember to subscribe down below. I would never be able to do this without you guys' support, so thank you for all of your support, and don't forget to continue to subscribe so we can hit 250 subscribers. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so you can check that out. I'll leave the link to that in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.